In 2012, when the first FotoFocus started happening, I was part of an exhibit called Photographers by Photographers. It was a brilliant concept, and Helen Adams and Melvin Greer and Samantha Greer and I rounded up about 60 photographers, and we had a party, and we picked names out of a hat, and we each photographed whoever's name we picked out of the hat. Getting to know Helen and Melvin and Samantha, I wanted to know more about photographers. For 2014, I produced with Scott Ginn a series of video conversations with photographers, including Helen Adams, Melvin Greer, Gordon Bear, Bob Fleischl, Jimmy Bolden, and Michael Wilson. In 2016, I produced a video with Scott on Anita Douthat and Cal Kowal. And sometime in that period of time, Jimmy Bolden and some other people suggested to me that I do a video about myself, which I thought was a funny idea, laughed it off. But I started thinking about it, and just sort of feeling that with my 70th birthday coming up, I decided to turn the camera on myself. I've been taking photographs for about 45 years, and over that time I've developed about 6 identifiable bodies of work. I started out doing street photography just really because when I started traveling in places I had never been, I saw compelling images on the street that I had never seen before in my sheltered Cincinnati life. I traveled, also did quite a bit of street photography in China, and that trip really turned me upside down. I still occasionally do street photography when I'm in a big city, and particularly in a city like Valparaiso, I've been photographing street art, which is really compelling there. I love black and white, but I shoot in color. I'm into details. I would say that I kind of become one with the subject that I'm photographing. I really immerse myself in a flower or anything that I'm photographing. For me, the photographic process is very quick. There's thought given to it, but it's very, especially after so many years of photographing, it's a very intuitive, and it's very emotional. And I like my photographs to have some emotional content. A lot of my photographs are what I would call meditative, very calming, and I like to shoot beauty. I like to shoot beautiful things. I like to share that with people. There's so much beauty around us. That's primarily what I photograph. I photograph a lot of ordinary things that most people do actually see all the time. I've been told that I see the extraordinary in the ordinary. People might say, oh, I saw that, but I didn't see it like that. So that's what I do. I really like to get close up. It's intimate, whether it be with animals, people, or things. Some people describe some of my work as painterly, and that may have something to do with my eyesight, but I see life as a painting. I do. A beautiful painting. I think that photographers in general are photographing old, ancient stories from the collective memory, and when other people connect with those old stories, some magic can happen. It can shift people's reality, can shift people's perception. I like for my photographs to excite people, maybe at first, but also to have them go inside and to calm down as well. And for me, it's a very calming, it's the same process. It's the being excited to see something and then feeling this kind of inner peace. People always ask me when I travel a lot, are you going to take pictures? And I just sort of laugh like, yes, I'm going to take pictures, and I'm also going to breathe. Taking pictures is like doing yoga for me. It's like brushing my teeth. It's something it's a practice for me. I'm always observing what's around me. This is my work, to observe and to share. Sometimes in my photographs I like to have people, when they view them, connect with their own inner landscapes, their memories, their yearnings. As a child growing up, I read Life magazine, I read The New Yorker, and my family had a book called The Family of Man, which I looked at over and over and over. It really struck a chord with me. Some of the images in that book really stayed with me my whole life. When I rediscovered that book later in life, it was a revelation to see what I had looked at as a child. My grandfather, Alfred Segal, gave me my first camera, which was a Brownie camera, and he was a columnist for the Cincinnati Post for 42 years. Anyway, he gave me a Brownie camera, and I used it as a child. I wasn't really seriously into photography as a child, but I started documenting my surroundings. I went to Walnut Hills High School. I did well in school, but I wasn't seriously interested in it. I went on to the University of Wisconsin, and it's there that I started studying art history, which was really the first compelling study that I undertook. I got really drawn into it. I really loved sitting in a dark room with a lot of people looking at images. It was really fun for me, and it was also a great way to learn history. At that time I had friends who were doing studio art, and I wanted to do some of that. Even though I had never been an artist, I never considered myself an artist. So I took some studio classes at Wisconsin. I always say I was the dumbest person in the class because everyone else had been an artist their whole life and they knew how to make things. And I learned how to make things, and I really enjoyed it. So instead of sitting in rows like other classes, we sat at tables, and it was very informal. And I started learning about design and composition and color theory, and that sort of rounded out my education. I transferred to Boston University in 1968 to be closer to the person who became my first husband. And probably my most important experience at Boston University was studying with Howard Zinn. I had never heard of him. I didn't seek him out, but there I was in his political science class, and it totally altered my life. I didn't become a radical, but my thinking really changed, and it shaped the rest of my life. I graduated from Boston University in 1970, and then I got married and moved to Ithaca, New York. My husband at the time was going to Cornell. I felt like I didn't know how to do anything with my hands, and I started taking a lot of courses like woodworking, batik, ceramics, welding, and I learned the basics of all those things. I wasn't really good at any of them. I made some tables, and I made some clothes and some pottery, but it's another thing that really rounded out my education. While I was in Ithaca, one day found my dream job in a newspaper. It was a job managing a newly opened Cafe DeWitt, which was in an old school building that was converted by architects to shops and apartments. And I didn't have any experience other than my own personal cooking experience, but I had an enthusiasm that obviously got me the job. So I managed Cafe DeWitt for a couple years, and it was a great, hard experience of being on my feet all day. I actually baked bread every day for the sandwiches at that cafe, and the people who worked there were part of a little family. Around 1975, I left Ithaca and headed out to California in a Datsun truck. I had a Nikon with me, and I was taking pictures for several years. The friend that I was traveling with encouraged me based on some of the slides I had shown him. And so that's really, I would say, when I started calling myself a photographer. I landed in Mill Valley, California in the late 1970s, and I joined an artist co-op. I started hanging my work there. That's when I really just started printing. I had a darkroom, I took workshops, and that was the beginning of my career. My new life in California also included studying Tai Chi, bicycling, swimming, running, and those are that really impacted my work. All those activities are as important to me as my photography. They create the physical well-being for me to create and to be creative. When I was living in the Bay Area, this is when I started doing photographs of jazz musicians, and I really immersed myself in the jazz world. I always loved music, but this was really an in-depth immersion into particularly jazz, but also many kinds of music, classical music, Indian music, all kinds of music. And the jazz portraits those were really the first things I printed on watercolor paper, and that became kind of a signature for me, with a deckled edge. The man I lived with at the time worked at the Keystone Corner, and we actually drove the musicians from San Francisco down to Santa Cruz to another club. People like Max Roach, Billy Higgins, a lot of really interesting jazz people rode in our van. Specific photographers that have influenced me are Imogen Cunningham, Diane Arbus, even though my work is nothing like hers. My sister gave me one of her books when I was in high school, and I've always loved her work. I find it very, well, of course unusual, but very direct and very raw. I'm also influenced by painters. I love George O'Keeffe. I love Kandinsky. I love Gerhard Richter. When I lived in San Francisco, I started taking photography workshops, and one of them was given by Deanne Delbridge. She gives a workshop, she's probably still giving them, about shooting what you're passionate about. When I heard that phrase, I was like right there. I consulted with her, and she basically consults with commercial photographers, and she helped me develop my portfolio, and she also taught me how to do Polaroid transfers right on her living room floor. I was fascinated with the process. It created an amazing result that looked like a watercolor painting, and it was fun, challenging, because you had to make many of them to get one good one. And she also connected me with Rod Dresser. He assisted Ansel Adams, and so I assisted him for about a year and a half. And what he wanted me to assist him with was marketing, which I knew nothing about. But he taught me, and I learned. And after a year or so, I realized I had to do that for myself. Deanne also connected me with Irene Young, who did a lot of album covers back in those days. And Irene graciously shared her studio with me, and that's really when I started doing studio work. While I was living in San Francisco, was really the beginning of my commercial photography career. I also did some corporate work, which was really challenging. Hauling all my equipment in downtown San Francisco was a real challenge. I never had an assistant in those days, but it was a learning time for me. In the late 1980s, I was having lunch with an old friend from Cincinnati, and she suggested that I be in touch with Jerry Mulch. And I sent him because she told me he was in advertising. I sent him a sample of my work, and he wrote me a note back, and we started talking on the phone. He came out to visit, and we fell in love. I didn't realize it, but when my father died when I was in high school, he sent me roses. And I'm sure I didn't realize at the time that he was probably one of the few people that understood what I was going through, because his father had died when he was much younger. So we had a very sort of deep connection, and we did a long distance relationship for a couple of years, and then we got married, and I eventually moved back to Cincinnati. I continued doing studio work. I had a couple studios at Pendleton, and then I had one behind Nicola's in the car barn, where for 10 years I did a lot of great work out of that car barn. My studio was really a great playground for me. I did some work for Talbot House. I did some corporate work. I was still doing weddings. In 1999, I was diagnosed with cancer. This was the hardest experience of my life. The previous hard experience being when my father died in high school, when I was in high school. I went through several months of chemo. I used it as a growth experience. I made a choice to go full on into all the things that I was already doing, Pilates, massage, meditation, and after a couple years, after that experience, I started to regain my strength and just reclaim my life. And that's when I started selecting images that I made into a series called Light Matters. Light Matters is the name of a series I showed around Cincinnati and some other places. I picked those images probably from the last 25 years, and some of them it was expanding over time because of their meditative quality or their sort of meaningfulness to me. Bella Ruth Naberstack has a series of audio tapes for different medical conditions, and I listened to one on cancer and general healing for probably a year. And one side is affirmations, and I just started writing some of those affirmations on some of the photographs that I had picked out. I actually got her permission to do that, and she actually used some of my photographs for some of her promotional material for a period of time. And so I showed that Light Matters piece inside for a number of years. After I had healed from my cancer experience, I made a decision not to do commercial photography. It just was one of the big stresses in my life, even though it also brought a lot of joy and contentment. I just needed to move some of the stress out of my life. Once I stopped doing commercial work, I just did my own inner assignments. I share my work in galleries. I make short videos, and also, of course, the videos for FotoFocus. And I share my work online. I shifted from film to digital, I don't know, about 10 years ago at least. One, I was using both, and one day I just started grabbing for the digital camera, and the film camera just got put in the bag. About 4 or 5 years ago, Yvonne Van Eyden invited me to be in a show at the Clifton Cultural Arts Center, and she showed me one of the rooms, and she said, "You can have this whole room," and I said, "I don't think I can fill the whole room," but I started to think about how I could print bigger. At the same time, I was just starting to use my iPhone to take pictures. I went on a trip to California right around that time, and on the beach where I walk every day in California was a display of seaweed like I'd never seen before. And I shot for several days with my iPhone, and I wanted to use those photos of seaweed in the show that Yvonne invited me to. I found a way to print these images from my iPhone 4 by 6 feet. So I displayed those 4 by 6 foot images at the Clifton Cultural Arts Center. It presented somewhat of a problem because they each weighed 20 pounds and hanging them was really challenging. After that point, I started shooting exclusively with my iPhone, and I really haven't used a 35mm camera since then. The fact that I use an iPhone to shoot all my images impresses some people, and it irritates other people. It's blasphemy to some of my photography friends. Travel is a way of life for me. My life is my work. And I'm passionate about shooting and documenting what's around me. And I like to share it with people.